Hey, before we get into today's conversation, please note that this conversation contains mentions of suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please reach out for help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24/7. Just dial 988. Remember, you're not alone.
Especially like with something like bipolar disorder, like to talk to somebody and say, hey, my husband's in the psychiatric unit because he wanted to kill himself. That's a very heavy topic. And it's hard to bring that up to somebody because I want to make sure that they're okay and that, you know, what are their emotions like? Are they going to be in that grieving and like anxiety moment too? It's this weird web of where you almost forget about yourself and the fact that you need care and you need to be supported and you need to look at like and ask yourself the same questions you would ask people around you. Like, how are you doing?
What does loving your neighbor actually look like? This is Journey with Care, where curious Canadians get inspired to love others well through real-life stories and honest conversations. This is Johan here. We are in our series, Battery Life of a Caregiver. We're exploring the lives of those who dedicate themselves to caregiving roles. We'll uncover what it takes, their self-care strategies, and how our communities can provide much-needed support around them. Today, I'm honored to have a returning guest and my daughter, Danika, to share a little bit about being a wife and support to someone living with bipolar disorder. But before we get into that conversation, remember that we have Journey with Prayer, 5-minute devotional to start off your week. That's on a separate feed. If you check the show notes, I got some links there for you to follow. And to continue to produce great content, we rely on the generosity of our listeners, donors, and sponsors of CareImpact to help the podcast and the work of CareImpact in the community. We value your support. We'd love to connect with new sponsors and donors to the podcast. Just head over to the show notes again or careimpact.ca/podcast. So Danika, who previously shared her adoption story at the beginning of this season 3, episodes 1 to 3, you can go listen to that if you want to hear her story. Danika is also the loving wife of Jadon, who opened up about his bipolar disorder diagnosis on episode 21 of season 3 this season. That episode was called Differently Wired, Navigating Bipolar Disorder in Community. Really good episode. I encourage you to check it out. Feel free to pause this episode and listen to that one. It might be a good way to preview this episode. But here we are. Welcome to the podcast, Danika.
Thank you for having me again. Looking forward to the conversation.
I always love having conversations with you, whether it's on the podcast or in my living room. All right, Danika, we're going to get right into it. Let's go to the beginning. Not the beginning of your life, but can you reminisce about the early days of your relationship with Jadon? What drew you to him?
Yeah, so when I first came to Winnipeg, I was a part of a smaller church community. And so Jadon was one of 2 of the young adults there. And I just noticed that he just was a really joyful individual and super committed to Jesus. And I just really admired that. I think it kind of just went from there. It also helped that he lived like 10 houses down from where I was living. And so during like the COVID pandemic, we would start going for walks one summer, got to know each other a bit better, did an online Bible study with some people from our church. And then it was when I started studying with him in the University of Manitoba engineering basement. During my first year of university, we went for walks every single day for like 4 months. And during that time, it was still like his heart for Jesus and just the love that he had for him and just how faithful he's been in his walk with the Lord just really drew me to him. And he's super funny, kind of like a carefree individual.
Yeah, he's one of the most joyful people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And we went through a little bit of that dating story in our episode 1 to 3 there, where you shared about the walks of the pandemic and the awkwardness of walking across the street and waving to the person you're dating, which is kind of odd. But did you suspect anything about Jadon's mental health during that time of dating?
Yeah, so because I knew him before we started dating, he had taken like a break from school for like an entire semester and had kind of mentioned something, how it was like for his mental health. And so our first date, we talked about his mental health, like in great detail. And I got to kind of know more about like his depression and like that cycle where one moment he's like okay, and then suddenly everything sucks and he is starting to have like suicidal thoughts regularly.
But he didn't have a diagnosis at this point, right? While you were dating.
No, he didn't have a diagnosis at all. It's like this mysterious thing that just started happening to him.
So when you had those conversations about his mental health, do you feel like that was a red flag for you, or was that something that drew you to him and something that you felt like, you know what, this is part of who you are, and I'm willing to deal with this?
I think for me, just with my own mental health journey and, my biological dad has PTSD that's pretty bad. And so I just didn't see it being like the core of who he is. It was definitely something that I did consider in like, walking with him and like learning how to support him during those times. But he was so much more than just his mental health. And, when you start falling in love, it's like there's going to be good things about the person you marry and there's going to be things that are going to be difficult to walk through. But yeah, I didn't see it as a red flag. I just saw it as, oh, maybe the Lord's like bringing us together because of my background with mental health and just the way that I view it. Another important thing is like when we first started dating, like I was surprised that he liked me back. I'd always had this like idea that I was too broken or just too much to be in a relationship. And just he loved me back so well. And like he loved the quirkiest, weirdest parts of me. And it was just a really refreshing experience.
That's amazing. So you guys get married. Now let's talk about that time frame leading up to when Jadon actually got his diagnosis. How did that come about? How did he get that diagnosis? And how did you guys react to the news? How did you respond?
Yeah, so I had a general idea of his like suicidal thoughts and like depressive like episodes. But when we got married, it was like 2.5 weeks after the wedding, he came home and he was like, "Hey, I walked to the bridge and I almost jumped." And I was like, okay, this is fine. I remained calm, but once we were married, I really saw what they were actually like. Cause like I was there in the middle of the night when he'd wake up and need to talk or having hours and hours of conversations. And so it was just an added like challenge in that first year, trying to learn to navigate to live with someone when they can be depressed one moment, super happy, or just all of a sudden like mellow kind of in between. And so for the first like year and a half of our marriage, it was like almost every single month, it was like a cycle that he would start to get like into a low, as we called it, and then he wouldn't be sleeping well. And then he would get the suicidal ideation. And it just really varied on how severe that would be each time. And so a lot of it was encouraging him and pushing him towards, going for therapy. Then we went on antidepressants because we just thought it was chronic depression. That's what like the doctor was saying. And we were just waiting until we found like the right supports to navigate it. But it was hard. I mean, when you're married and it's your first year, something that Jane and I have talked about, we didn't really get that honeymoon phase. We started with life and death situations and just really going into the, for better or for worse, in sickness and health, like immediately. And so eventually he got on some antidepressants. And once they kicked in, nothing happened for like 7 months. And then all of a sudden, after that 7 months, he went back into a low. And so our doctor was like, oh, we'll just switch you onto a different kind of antidepressant. Sometimes they build up in your body and they don't work. And when he went on these ones, that's when he had his first like noticeable manic episode. And personally, that was scarier than when he was lower because he wasn't sleeping at all.
So what did that look like, a manic episode? I mean, he describes it a little bit in his episode, but from your perspective, like, how did you feel during those manic episodes and what did it look like from your perspective?
From my perspective, it looked like he was going insane. Also, he was just like mega genius all of a sudden. Like the stuff he was talking about was insane, but he was just full of energy all the time. And that really soft, careful, considerate side of him just disappeared. And so it was really hard because I really wanted him to be happy and thriving and enjoying life. But now he was in a situation where I was asking him not to do that. And that was like the hardest thing to do. I did end up saying something very bluntly to him at one point because he's like, "Don't you want me to be happy?" I told him something along the lines like, "The only one that's enjoying your happiness right now is you. And that was really hard to say, but once I said that, that's when like Jadon and I had alarm bells going off. And we talked to our family doctor, and that's when we first heard the words bipolar disorder.
So where did it go from there? How did he get that official diagnosis?
So he had to go off the antidepressants that he was trying because for those with bipolar disorder, they cause manic episodes. And then we got him onto one medication for bipolar, but our general practitioner, she can't prescribe anything higher. And so she had to refer him to a psychiatrist. And we just waited because you can't rush a referral to psychiatry. They're overworked and there's such a demand and there's not enough to meet that demand. And so that up and down was normal life at that point.
So when you get the diagnosis, how did you guys react? What was your response? How did you feel? What were the emotions going on at that time?
So that was January of this year. And a lot was going on for me emotionally already. The whole reason we got the diagnosis is I lost someone really important to me. And I just didn't have the emotional capacity to go through another low. And I noticed his like suicidal ideation was like super bad. I was exhausted. And I was like, if I keep him at home, I'm being selfish because I just don't want to be away from him. But he needs help. And so we went to the crisis response center, was up most of that night, and they decided to send him to the psychiatry ward so that they could go through a formal diagnosis process because they were pretty convinced he had bipolar disorder at this point. And that way they could try different meds and try them at higher doses so they work faster. And he could also get that formal diagnosis in a week instead of waiting so many months for like a community psychiatrist. And so I remember like when they came to get him to bring him to the psych ward, they asked if I wanted to walk with him. And I just knew I couldn't walk with him and then be escorted out of the building. Like it was I was like I just felt so empty inside at that point. You know, my best friend, the person that like I feel the safest with, wasn't by my side during a time that I was grieving someone that was super important to me.
How did you get through that time?
So I remember the first night, Jadon's brother picked me up from the crisis response center, and then I went to your guys' house. You and mom were not there yet. You were going to be there like a little bit later. And so I remember Eli was home. And so it was just really special because he and I just watched a movie in the basement together. And it was just really nice to not be asked about it. And then I have a really good friend from my church who I was getting fairly close with her family and her kids. And when I updated her about what was going on, it was just so refreshing. Her first question was like, why didn't you guys tell me about Jadon's mental health sooner? Or, you know, asking all these questions. But she was like, you can come stay at our house anytime that you need. We will feed you. We're here for you. And like the whole week, because I did go stay at their house overnight one night. And then I would get texts during the days when I wasn't there, like, have you had lunch? Are you eating? Are you drinking? Did you sleep last night? And it was just so refreshing because unknown to me at that time, I have ADHD. And so eating regularly can be difficult on a good day. And I just felt like I was known by somebody and like their focus was completely on me and what I needed. And it was just so good because it made it easier to talk about what was going on with Jadon and how I was feeling. And they were just a really good rock during that time.
Yeah, because often in these crisis situations, you'll often get the question, how is Jadon doing? And it doesn't often come where they'll ask how you're doing because it's very stressful for the caregivers in these crisis situations.
It is. And I understand that because it's also very stressful for people that care about the individual because it's like they want to make sure they're okay. Like Jadon is such a core person in our community and so many people love him. And it's also so scary to ask a caregiver how they're doing because it's like, what's your relationship like for them? Or we're not necessarily taught in society how to care for somebody when they're going through something like that. Be a support or like, you know, is it okay to ask this question? But it's just, we're not taught to ask about the caregiver first and then the person that's being cared for.
Do you feel there's sometimes maybe feelings of guilt to even bring up about how you're feeling when you get questions like that? Like, is there a guilt thing there?
Sometimes, like, I wanted to be asked first. I wanted people to see me and to focus on me, but of course, I'm riddled with guilt and shame because my husband's in the psychiatric unit at the hospital and I'm able to be at home.
Yeah, it almost feels like, how can I be so selfish to think about my own care when my husband's in the hospital, right?
Yeah, yeah. This was like one of the most emotional weeks I've had in my life. And I had to sit down and like make the hard decision like, am I going to continue with my degree?
Because you were wondering if you had to quit school just to care for him a little bit more and to be available, right?
Yeah. And I was so close to finishing my degree too. And I really didn't want to stop. And so a lot of it was asking people questions and needing to initiate sometimes when I needed help or I needed to talk something through, which is okay. But at the same time, that's added exhaustion because I'm also thinking I don't want to burden people with these hard emotions, these really hard conversations, and almost like wanting to care for others around you in your community as well. Especially like with something like bipolar disorder, like to talk to somebody and say, hey, my husband's in the psychiatric unit because he wanted to kill himself. That's a very heavy topic. And it's hard to bring that up to somebody because I want to make sure that they're okay and that, what are their emotions like? Are they going to be in that grieving and like anxiety moment too? It's this weird web of where you almost forget about yourself and the fact that you need care and you need to be supported and you need to look at like and ask yourself the same questions you would ask people around you. Like, how are you doing? Are you grieving? Are you anxious? Are you scared?
And spoiler alert, Danika, of course, you got your degree. You worked so hard, especially through the challenges, and you persevered. It's amazing. But since the diagnosis, like you guys had to learn how to deal with bipolar. So what kind of work have you and Jadon, specifically you, like what have you had to do to manage and learn about bipolar and how to implement those things into your guys' everyday lives?
So, in the beginning, when he did come home, he ended up reading a book on like bipolar disorder. And I haven't had the opportunity yet to read through it, but the first thing I did is I let him just talk in detail about what he was learning about himself. And it was just such a difference once he got on the medication and had a community psychiatrist. Like, he was himself and was, like, able to, like, manage his emotions and be more stable. Like, it was a night and day difference. And so, I've just learned to ask him questions and to be a reminder that having a day that you feel sad isn't gonna spiral out of control anymore, and just getting to almost be similar to before where just being that emotional support and that comfort and listening and talking with him. Now we know what it is. We have a name for it. And just the relief that came with that on its own, like, was the biggest thing to learn.
So now that he's on meds, it feels a little bit more stable, right? So what does a manic episode look like now and how do you navigate that? How would you respond when you're seeing a little bit of a manic episode arising?
The really cool thing, and like just such a testimony of the Lord, the first, like, they call it like a cocktail for medications when you're taking different medications together to get the best effect. The first group of medications they put him on once he was out of the psychiatric unit, he hasn't had any mania.
It's amazing.
Like, I haven't seen him go into any like really depressive lows or into like really high highs. It's like his emotions don't go from one extreme to the other. They're just that natural. Like, some days are a little bit more like blood. Other days are like, oh, this is really good. But he's stable. And I see that confidence and that trust in his emotions now. And it's so good.
Now I remember you getting the diagnosis and you're a little disappointed to find out that this isn't something that's just going to go away and disappear. Like this is something you got to learn to live with. So how important has it been having a strong support network around both you and Jadon, and who are some of those key people that specifically you that you depend on when you feel like you're having challenges as a caregiver?
I definitely lean like a lot on you and mom because,
Well, I hope we would be there for you.
well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's really like, for those who have listened to like the third episode of my adoption story, I remember like I was just kind of starting in January to lean on you guys more when something came up and being a little bit more vulnerable when I needed help. And then like this just really helped with that because it's like I was able to like text you guys anytime, be like, hey, like this isn't going great. And like my gecko got sick while Jadon was in the psychiatric ward. And so you drove me to a vet, which was so helpful because like my gecko's my emotional support. And he decided that was the best week to get sick. And so it's just like, I feel like I'm way more confident now to come and like ask you guys questions or say, like, hey, it's really, really hard right now. And we need this. And it's just, I think it's really just brought that family relationship with you guys and also the siblings to just new levels. And then that family from church, like this summer when I was finishing my degree, it was like so busy. And I was over at their place for supper regularly. And that really helped because I'm not the biggest fan of cooking at all. And so I was able to like go, eat a meal and just really get to be a part of normal life. And they just treated Jadon normal too. And that really helps. Like I really lean on them for like that support and like knowing that it's like there's another like member of our community that we can go over anytime, open door. And then also like Jadon having the opportunity to speak on the podcast, it's opened so many doors and so many conversations where people like I feel like they feel more like confident to be able to ask him questions.
That seems so important, right?
Yeah.
Like even being able to tell our stories and being honest with our mental health, it really does open those doors to more conversations and being able to care for one another as communities, being better supports to the caregivers as well as those needing care. It's amazing what just having a conversation could do for that.
Yeah. And I think like the biggest thing now that he's in that like stability, his medications are working really well and everything. It's like the best thing caregivers can do right now is just treat us like normal because this is our normal. And yeah, it's going to impact him for the rest of his life. And there could be times that his medication needs to be changed up, but like he has a community psychiatrist now and he's able to talk to them. And, many, many people with bipolar disorder go on to live very normal lives. And so being treated normal and just that love and that knowing that when something, if it does happen, that, we still have that network and that support to fall on and that I'm not forgotten in that. That's a very important thing now is that, yes, we are one. And yes, Jadon is the one that is very much impacted by his mental health because it's his body, it's his brain. But at the same time, I'm very much impacted by it as well because he's like my best friend, my like super safe person. Like I couldn't imagine life without him anymore. And so the biggest thing I think for caregivers is that I'd want to say is like, don't forget about us.
Now, you've obviously had a challenging year. Let's talk about self-care a little bit. We know that there have been good people in those challenging times that have stepped in. But what about your own self-care? How do you recognize when things are starting to feel overwhelming? What kind of routines do you implement into your daily life to make you feel grounded, especially after having such a challenging year?
So I think because of how challenging of a year it's been, I was trying to implement like journaling is a huge thing for me. Like just sitting down, journaling and talking to the Lord is like just something I try to do on the regular, but implementing self-care while doing school was really difficult. And I started to notice that I was like leaning on Instagram a lot more. And there was moments that I wanted to do something better, but I just couldn't move. And so I think the biggest thing for self-care I ended up doing was I went on a hunch that I might have like ADHD and ended up going for an assessment and found out I do have it, which also was like life-changing for me, but now it's like I'm learning about my brain. That's the biggest thing I do for self-care is I do a lot of really good like affirmations and will like in moments that I feel frozen and like I'm going to be stuck and can't be in a routine because it's really difficult to get into one for me. I have a lot more grace and kindness and compassion towards myself. And so I'm finding that my current like self-care is a good like cup of coffee, hanging out with my cat and like either like doing one of my many hobbies or like reading a good book is what I'm leaning towards. Or if my brain is just like, seriously, like there's just so much going on up there, I'll just go watch like a documentary or like start working through a documentary series and just kind of give my brain that break.
It feels like a key self-care thing to do is to learn a little bit more about yourself and how you take it. That's why we did series on Differently Wired and Flavors of Care. We did like an 8-episode series, and it's all about learning what makes us tick. And it's important to learn those things about ourselves so that we know how to care for ourselves better, especially when you're caring for others, because you're not going to be a good caregiver to Jadon if you're not caring for yourself. So what are some of those early signs that you look for that indicate you might be nearing burnout, or you might need to do something for yourself for self-care?
So one of my biggest early signs is scrolling on Instagram for 2 hours or more and not even realizing that time's passed. And then another big indicator for me is when I'm falling back into old thought patterns and letting it happen. Like almost like digging myself a hole of self-pity is what I call it. That's when I start noticing that, like, okay, I'm starting to get burnt out. I'm not okay. And another big indicator is I stop having compassion towards Jadon for certain things, or I'm like, I just don't have the energy or the emotional capacity for this right now. Those are my two biggest red flags. I'm like, okay, I need to step back and take a deep breath and lean on my support network. And I've really learned to trust that I'm not the only one that gets to be a caregiver to Jadon. I'm not the only one that gets to be in his life and support him. And that at times when I need to take a step back and focus on myself, one, it's not selfish. I know there's people that he can talk to when he needs to if I'm not available to do that.
And sometimes it looks like a spa day with a good book in hand as well.
Yes. Yeah, there's lots and lots of reading. I think right now, like, I just finished my degree and have realized that school was a big stressor in my life and was really making it hard to do anything. And so I'm kind of in a season now where I'm discovering more of who I am and how I've been made and the things that I do. And the coolest thing to see is Jadon is at this point of stability where I don't know, it's such a sweet spot and it's such a sweet pocket for us right now in our marriage and just in that friendship and that being developed. And the more I reflect on the last year and just where I am now and just the support network I have, I know I'm just feeling super thankful. And I think that's been the best thing on my mental health is just getting to reflect on my community and just so thankful for the community we were in and that there were so many people that went past that awkwardness and did ask me about myself.
And it almost feels like you're just catching up with self-care now after being done school and the year that you've had. So
Definitely like playing some catch up. I've definitely noticed a big difference in myself, which I really like. And I feel like I have a lot more capacity for people and being a part of my support network. And so,
and you guys made a few different life changes as well. Like you said, you got a cat, and you guys actually moved from a dark apartment with cement walls to a nice older structure with more sunlight, different part of town. So a few changes like that. You want to talk about a few of those changes that you've made since the diagnosis that you feel like might have helped your mental health as well as Jadon's?
yeah, so we were in a very dark apartment before. And so we ended up moving closer to our church community. So now we're like really like plugging in. That is amazing. That's been so good for me. It's like it's a 7-minute drive instead of a half-hour drive. So I feel like I'm really starting to invest more in like friendships that I was wanting to. And also where we used to live, getting to a place to walk was really hard because we lived like right off of like a highway. And that was like a huge barrier for me to go for a walk or even go outside. And so now I just walk outside our apartment and I'm in a neighborhood with trees and it's quiet and I love squirrels and stuff. So like there's a lot of them here and I get to just enjoy looking at them. And one of my favorite coffee shops is like a 7-minute walk away. So if I want to just go journal there or do something fun, I can. So I feel like, yeah, just that moving was so good for me personally and feel so homey here with my plants and just the colors that are around me. So
And like you said, you guys really didn't get much of a honeymoon phase. So does it feel like you're kind of starting to step into that where you get to know each other beyond having a bipolar diagnosis and being in school?
yeah, I really feel like we're stepping into that where we're just really getting to know each other. And we just went on like a big like dream vacation. Like I got to go to Greece this summer, which was just so fun. And we had so much fun on that trip. And so it just feels like such a sweet pocket of getting to know one another, but really just also celebrate how close we are now since the diagnosis. And now it's like, that's not the center of our lives anymore. It's something that we're aware of. It's something that it's managed and will continue to need to manage, but we're both walking hand in hand on this journey to understand ourselves more and how we tick and having that compassion for one another. And sometimes that looks like weird routines, and other times it looks like really deep conversations to get to know one another, and it's been really good.
And you also talked about how being closer to church was helpful. What role does faith in your church community play in helping you maintain that mental and emotional well-being and your guys' marriage together, your relationship?
It's so central. Like, I have a couple friends who just got married this summer, and so it's just really fun getting to pour into those relationships. But I feel like faith has always been so important to me. And just yesterday at church, I was really reflecting on like that cry of desperation in like my like 16, 17-year-old heart of like just wanting to be healed and wanting to not feel so broken and stuff. Being close to our church community has really just accelerated that healing. And I feel so accepted and welcomed there. And like people know who I am and they celebrate me for who I am. And they celebrate Jadon for who he is. No one had a super negative response when he started talking about having bipolar disorder. And so it's our normal. And we get to be celebrated by those in our community and celebrate others. And I think for me, serving in the church more is accessible. And it's really helping keep me accountable to reading my Bible and praying and just walking closely with the Lord. And I think for both of us, that's been really good.
All right, we're coming to the end here. I know we can keep talking, and you're coming over tonight to do laundry, so I'm sure we'll talk some more. What message do you want to leave with our listeners? Is there something that you want to say that we didn't get to chat about?
The biggest thing I want to say is suicidal ideation is real. And that even if it can be managed at home and with your community, when you're feeling weak or you don't know what would happen if you took somebody to a crisis response center or they need more help, like at a psychiatric level, trust God that he's going to be your strength, but don't wait as long as I did, because it takes way too long to get a psychiatrist in the community, and regular suicidal ideation is not healthy. And sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you're caring about is the hardest thing to say to them. And I just really want to encourage people and remind them that you aren't the only one caring. Like, God is in the midst of it. He holds everything together. He's our strength. He's our provider, and that it's going to be okay. So don't be afraid about sending somebody to the hospital on something that is their mental health, because you never know what door it could open for them.
That's great, Danika. Just so much courage to share your guys' story, and I'm so grateful. And you're such a testament of strength and love for Jadon and what a caregiving role looks like, especially being a young person and being a student. It's just so inspiring. So I want our listeners to remember that self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So thank you, Danika, for sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining another conversation on Journey with Care, where we inspire curious Canadians on their path of faith and living life with purpose in community. Journey with Care is an initiative of CareImpact, a Canadian charity dedicated to connecting and equipping the whole church to journey well in community. You can visit their website at careimpact.ca or visit journeywithcare.ca to get more information on weekly episodes, Journey with Prayer, and details about our upcoming events and meetups. You can also leave us a message, share your thoughts, and connect with like-minded individuals who are on their own journeys of faith and purpose. Thank you for sharing this podcast and helping these stories reach the community. Together we can explore ways to journey in a good way. And always remember to stay curious.